You're very welcome. Hello, this is webinar 4 in our UX Byte series of lunchtime explorations into the world of UX across various topics. Welcome to those of you who come from Ireland, north and south, those of you in England and Scotland, in Canada, and all of those who have joined us who are further afield. Always great to have you with us, and thanks for joining us. Our topic today is the topic of optimizing customer journeys for conversion. We'll get into a little bit more about what that means when we get into the topic in earnest. But just to let you know who is presenting today, you have myself. I'm Gareth Dunlop. I'm the CEO at Fathom. You can see my email address there. You can also see my Twitter handle. Please do email me or tweet me. Follow me, DM me, whatever way you want to get in touch afterwards, if that is useful to you. But I'm not alone. I am ably assisted with my colleague, Andrew.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Andrew McCrea. I work with Gareth at Fathom as well. I'm a UX strategist at Fathom, part of the senior team. Like Gareth, very open to any sort of communication you want to send via Twitter, email, or maybe even get me on LinkedIn, whatever suits. But more than happy to respond to any queries or advice you might want to send my way.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Okay, folks, we have a time format that we've been sticking to, which has been working really well for us, which is that myself and Andrew will work hard to get through all of our material in 30 minutes, which should leave a good 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. As Andrew put in the webinar chat at the start, please do send in questions as we go, and we'll tackle as many of them at the end as we can. We've got feedback in previous webinars, and the feedback has consistently said that people have enjoyed the less formal QA at the end as much as they have enjoyed the kind of formal stuff during the presentation itself. So don't be shy about asking questions. We work as hard as we can to assure you there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you ask a question which you think might be stupid, I bet you just have the nerve to ask a question that lots of other people are thinking but just haven't asked. So please fill up the questions as we go, and we'll tackle as many of those at the end as we possibly can. Between now and the Q&A, you can see that we're going to spend some time thinking about the sales cycle. We're going to consider the role of integration. We're going to think about how we can oil the gears of the customer journey, how we can deal with sales objections, and then Andrew's going to take us through a couple of case studies to finish us off when we think about test, test, test as our closing mantra. So that's what we've got in store. And with no further ado, let's jump into the material itself. So let's kick off by thinking about the sales cycle. And let's maybe take a step back and begin to think about what the sales cycle feels like through the lens of the customer. If we want a customer to go from not knowing about us to becoming a loyal advocate for us, in other words, they become a repeat customer, a loyal customer, they buy from us regularly, and they recommend us to our friends. If that's what we want to achieve through our sales and marketing funnel, traditionally there are 5 steps in that sales and marketing funnel. There's awareness, letting people know that we exist. There is consideration, giving people more information about us as they begin to build up an interest in what we have to offer. There is decision making, where people become interested in our offering versus that of our competitors. They get into the real detail of thinking about what they might buy. There's conversion, which is the moment at which they say, yep, we're buying something. And then there's advocacy, which is where we've built a relationship with the customer. They are loyal to our product or our service or our brand. They think it's brilliant. It adds value to their life, and they tell their friends about it. So that's a typical sales funnel. It's not new. It's one that many of you will have seen, or a variation of it over years if you've been interested in the world of sales and marketing. And of course, what happens is that there are lots of marketing and sales activities which happen across the different columns of that model, which we use to move people along the funnel. And depending on whether it's B2B, business to business, or B2C, business to consumer, people will move through that funnel at a different pace. So particularly in the world of business to business, people tend to go in quite a deliberate way. They go from awareness to consideration to decision-making to conversion. And very often our activities in one column simply involve converting the customer to the next column. It's unrealistic to think that we might get them straight from awareness to conversion in the world of business to business. In the world of business to consumer, it can happen more quickly. But the overall job of the sales funnel is to move people through an ordered program of activity and consideration which matches how they go about buying a product. And we've put in some example tactics across the columns just to give you an example of the types of things which happen. So for instance, TV and radio advertising are most commonly associated with awareness. Pay-per-click, performance marketing, thought leadership, content marketing often arrives around the consideration piece. Decision-making tends to bring people onto owned media, such as websites on mobile. They might go to competitor websites or review sites. When it comes to conversion, we would use things like alerts, notifications, inbound marketing tools, triggered emails. And when it comes to advocacy, we're into CRM, customer relationship management, encouraging people to socially share, contribute to reviews, and so on. So those are just a range of example tactics across the piece. And of course, the tactics vary from organization to organization, and the amount of effort and money and so on and spend that goes in across the funnel changes across the piece, and so it should. But there's two important observations that we want to make in this funnel, which I hope sets the tone for everything else that we want to consider when it comes to conversion optimization. The first thing to say is that the more time we spend on the left-hand side, the more expensive the marketing activity is. So for those of you who have ever put adverts on television or adverts on radio or adverts on billboards, you will know that that media space is expensive. For those of you who are involved in buying media for performance marketing on the Google ad network or Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Bing, Yahoo, whatever, you will know that there is an expense to that, in that case, very often built on cost per click. So the further to the left-hand side we go, the more expensive it is to get people moved across the funnel. And there's a number of observations that we make based on that. The main observation is that the role, therefore, of digital product, whether that's a website or an app, its primary role has to be efficiently moving people from the expensive part of the funnel, which is buying media, to the less expensive part of the funnel, which is being on your website. And so because of that, a primary role of a website, perhaps the primary role of a website, is to support the sales funnel to drive efficiency into the most expensive parts of the funnel. So when we think about conversion, what we are saying is, what can we do by way of the digital product that we build that will support the bits of this sales funnel which are most expensive? But there's a second thing which we need to consider as well, which is who is in control. And again, the further we move from the left to the right, and when we look at that second arrow, what we observe is that the more the user or the potential customer moves from left to right, the less the organization is in control, and the more the user is in control. So for instance, if you book a TV ad or you book a radio ad, you're in full control of what that says. You're in full control of what program it goes on, what time it goes out. You'll be aware of the demographics of who hear it. You are in full, unequivocal control of that message, because if you've paid the piper, you call the tune. So you're in control of that message. And each time you move to the right, you're slightly less in control of the message. So by the time a user gets to decision-making or conversion, they're not just listening to what you have to say about yourself on your own website. They're going to competitor websites. They're going to review websites. They have lots of options, and you're in very little control of what that user does. And so because of that, as the user moves across the sales funnel to the right-hand side, so the job of the marketer becomes less about getting attention and more about giving attention. If someone is on your website, you must not and should not use the same techniques that you've used to get attention on the television or to get attention in the PPC campaign. If someone is on your site, you have their attention. They are giving you their attention. So your responsibility switches to giving that user your attention. There's no need anymore to let them know you exist. They know you exist, they're on your site. Your job is to listen and to answer their questions. And the emotional contract which people buy into when they visit your site is unbelievably straightforward. I will give you my attention if you don't waste my time. And as users get onto your site, they become really fixated on being in control. So we all know what it's like when we visit the website and we get the cookies pop up, and then we get the can we send you alerts pop up, and then we get the can we make you the homepage pop up, and then we get the would you like to subscribe to our email newsletter pop up, and then we get the are you the right age to visit this alcohol website pop up. We know what it's like when we're out of control. It gets very, very frustrating very, very quickly. And so because of that, we got to make sure that we apply the rules of interactive communication, i.e. giving attention, rather than the rules of presentational, which is getting attention. And when it comes to interactive media, let me make one final point on just how seriously users take being in control of the interaction. And the example that I always give is the U2 album from about 5 years ago, Songs of Innocence. As I'm sure you may know, U2 launched their album, Songs of Innocence, about 5 years ago. And they decided that what they would do is that they would launch it and make it available for free. But not only would they make it available for free, they would automatically put it on anyone who had an iPhone. They would put it on their device. So with no effort whatsoever, the user, the customer would get an album from one of the world's largest rock groups for free with no effort. And so you might say to yourself, wow, that's amazing. That's a marketing person's dream. That's brilliant. That couldn't be better. Although when you look what happened, what we realized was that U2's generous giveaway was a complete PR disaster. Why? Because people hated not being in control of the interaction. The idea that someone would put an album for free, even if it was from the world's largest rock group, and even if there was no effort required, that idea made people feel a bit creeped out. What are U2 doing in my pocket? I didn't ask them for them to be there. I didn't want them to be there. So users take being in control of the interaction really seriously. And I say that because it's very tempting for well-meaning marketers wanting to drive up conversion to think that there are things that they must say to the customer that if they don't know, they won't buy. But time and again, experience tells us that you convert by listening first. You convert by putting the customer in charge of the interactions. Now, here's the killer. If you're going to do that, there's something you've got to know. You've got to know what your customer's questions are. You've got to know what your customer needs to find out if they're going to buy from you. And if you just guess, or if you make assumptions, or if you just copy your competitors, you run the chance that what will happen to you is the same as what happened to you too, which is you think you're giving your customer something which they want, but as it turns out, it's not anything that they want at all. So users take these interactions very, very seriously. So what do we do about that? I think the first thing that we might say is that we got to work really, really hard to integrate activity and not to throw our outputs over the wall. What do I mean by that? I mean that in theoretical terms, the sales cycle looks like you see in the screen. But in practical terms, sometimes it can look a bit more like this. There are barriers between the different columns. And particularly if you're in charge or you're looking after the marketing for a large brand that's got big budgets, it's not uncommon that you have, let's say, an advertising agency who might be responsible for awareness. You might have a performance marketing company who are responsible for consideration. You may have a CRO or a UX company who are responsible for decision-making and conversion. And you may have a social company, let's say, who look after advocacy. And the difficulty is that these organizations, quite rightly, are measured on different things. So what can happen is that the awareness organization, who might be measured by branded search, who might be measured by volume of traffic on a website, they're pushing volume into the system. And then the PPC people are pushing more volume into the system, and they're happy with volume, but they haven't thought about conversion further down the line. So conversion means different things across different ways. And the big message would be, please try to align, whether you've got multi-agencies or whether you've got a single agency, try to align conversion across the piece and try to intersect what we understand by conversion along the way so that the goals of various agencies or various teams or various people are lined up. Regularly, I speak to performance marketing people who feel somewhat frustrated that they are doing a really good job pushing traffic onto a website, but conversion is poor, the customer is underwhelmed, but the PPC agency has done a perfectly good job. Similarly, I find situations where maybe a website has been well built and conversion is high, but there's not enough traffic being powered through it to generate the revenue that it wants. So we need a really joined up view of how we understand conversion. Let me give you a real simple example of that in practice. This is a customer of Fathom's from the early days. This is a sort of a 2011, 2012 customer. An organization based in Donegal called Auto Fast Fit, and you can see what they do. They offer tires and exhausts and servicing. The guy who owns that business comes from a famous Donegal rallying family, and I would put a bet that there's not a single thing about a car that he doesn't know. And he launched a website in the mid-noughties. It wasn't transactional, but you could look at some of their products. You could send in an inquiry and he would fulfill it for you. He would take some credit card details over the phone. And what he was finding was that the phone was ringing off the hook all the time. There was big demand. He was very good on the phone. He could answer most questions first time. And he was shipping 50 or 60 orders a day out of his business in Donegal. And he was thinking, why am I in the middle here? Why am I on the phone? I could be selling to customers directly. He didn't use this language, but in the language of conversion optimization, he was saying, if I could answer customer queries on my website as efficiently as I can answer customer queries on the phone, then the kinds of conversion that I enjoy on the phone might also flow through the site. When we launched the site, there were a number of areas of the site where conversion wasn't what it might have been or should have been. And one of the things which the owner of the business did was to ask his friends if they would go onto the site, try to buy some product and see how they found the process, just to get a bit of peer feedback. And what was interesting was his friends come back and said, oh yeah, the process works really well, find the website really straightforward to use, no problem. So in other words, the areas of the site where conversion wasn't what it should have been, when he spoke to his friends to see how they found it, it turns out they found it very straightforward. So counterintuitively, he had a double problem. Number one, that conversion on certain areas wasn't what it should be. But number two, when he spoke to people who were using the site, they found it easy. So we had to work out what the problem was with conversion. There were two problems with the way that he went about solving his problem. The first problem was who he spoke to, and the second problem was what he asked them to do. And I want to just share with you a little bit about how data informed our way out of the challenge. So the first thing which he did was he sent people to the homepage of his website and he asked them to buy clutches or tires or whatever it happened to be. So that was a mistake for a start, because when we looked at analytics, we realized that over 70% of his traffic came from Google. And of that traffic, the vast majority was people searching for specific items. So people weren't searching for tires, exhausts, and services in Donegal. People were searching for exhaust kit 1999 Ford Escort. They were searching for Pirelli tires 2003 Citroen and so on. So people's Google searches were specific. And as a result, Google was taking people to specific product pages for specific models of cars. So the owner of the business asking his friends to start their journey on the homepage wasn't reflective of how the majority of his customers were seeking to buy his product. There's an example where he stayed within his column, he stayed within his decision-making column, but if he had looked at a wider view across columns, he would have recognized that the customer journey wasn't segmented the way his sales and marketing process was. The customer journey was supposed to feel like a flow to the customer. So when we got involved from a usability testing perspective, we started the process not on the homepage, we started the process on Google, which is where most of his customers' customer journey began. The second mistake that he made is that he asked his friends. And this is a particular mistake in this industry because this guy comes from a rallying family. His father was a rally driver. He was a rally driver. He's in his 40s now, but his kids are teenagers. They're starting to do rally driving. Who are all his friends? His friends are the people that he knows from rally driving. What do rally drivers know about? Well, they know about cars inside out. What about the person who's looking for new tires for their Citroen or new brake pads for their Ford Escort? What do they know about cars? They know far, far less about cars. They have far less confidence about cars than the people who were coming to the site. So the feedback that he was getting, oh yeah, the site's easy to use, I understand it, I can flow about, was the feedback from people who weren't representative of who the website was for. So I share that example just as to give you an example of what can happen when we confine our testing to not look beyond friends and family and not look beyond the bigger picture in terms of the sales process. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is that we want to oil the gears, i.e. we want to identify flow and we want to build motorways. So what does that mean? It means this, that for many tasks, there are lots of common ways that users expect to buy things. So whatever your sector happens to be and whatever products or services you sell, you will find that there are products and services which are in common with a large percentage of your customers, and the questions that they ask and the order in which they ask them and the questions that they want answered and the order that they want answered in have lots in common. Now, of course, humans aren't one homogeneous mass, but there are regularly strong patterns in terms of the ways that the majority of your customers want to buy your products. What this oiling the gears piece says is, know what those questions are, know the order that most people are asking the questions in, and build motorways, build unbelievably efficient flows from first awareness right through to advocacy for those motorways. Invest time and effort in the data that you need to find out that will allow you to work out what is the way that most of my customers want to begin the process of considering and buying from me and buying again. And once you know it, design your entire flow around it. Let me give you a really straightforward example. Contrast the UK passport application process with the Irish passport application process. And let's begin to think about oiling the gears. Let's begin to think about some of the questions that you might have as you approach these and you're wanting to think about using them to either apply for or renew a passport. Let me ask you some simple questions. What functionality is available on the Irish passport website? And what functionality is available on the UK passport website? Well, on the UK passport website, that question is unbelievably easily answered, because I can see the first thing that it tells me is that I can apply for, renew, replace, update passport, and pay for it online. I know exactly, with no ambiguity whatsoever, what is on offer from that site. But what about the same question on the Irish website? Well, there's far more information on the Irish website, so that must make it better, right? Well, it turns out it doesn't, because finding the information is very difficult. Renew your passport book and or passport card, or apply for your first passport card. Terms and conditions. Doesn't tell me if I can pay. Doesn't tell me the difference between a passport book and a passport, and there is one. I speak from experience. And it doesn't tell you if you can do this either only in the Irish jurisdiction, or if you can do it in NI or GB, or if you're an Irish diaspora. And again, as it turns out, some of those things you can do if you're based in the Republic of Ireland, and some of those things you can't. So there's an example whereby the key questions that a user needs to know that will determine whether they convert to the next piece of the process are ably answered in one example and not in the other. Sometimes when I share this slide, either at maybe at a conference or in a class, I sometimes ask the question, what do you do next if you want to apply for a UK passport? What do you do next if you want to apply for an Irish passport? And again, in the UK, it's unbelievably straight. It couldn't be more straightforward, the answer to that question. You press the Start Now button. What about Irish? Well, as it turns out, you press the link. So when we put these things together, it gives us the data that we need to design confidently. You can only confidently remove content from a page on a website when you know it's irrelevant to a user. If you don't have your hands on that data, what you can end up doing is adding in loads of clutter, as we see in the Irish example. But if you do know, then you can put in only the killer content that you need for that moment in the journey that the user needs to process through that funnel. Fathom was involved in building the experience for the Tesco mobile e-commerce experience in the Republic of Ireland, and also the customer support experience. And again, we built customer journeys. We thought about what is the main way users want to flow through the system. And you can see here there are standard purchases, research-led purchases, and direct purchases. We then use customer journey plans to think about what are the questions that they have at each stage, what are the pain points that they have at each stage, what problems does the design has to solve at each stage. And having done that, that allowed us to match customer problems with flow. And on a screen-by-screen page, it helped us to identify what is the primary content and function of each page, what is the secondary content and function for each page. And we built a customer journey for each of the motorways, for each of the use cases. In this case, handset or plan purchase, prepay SIM purchase, prepay bundle purchase. Okay, final couple of examples then, and I'll hand over to Andrew for our case studies. The other thing to mention is that there are well-known conversion killers, things that can stop a user who was otherwise motivated to buy something, can stop them in their tracks. And there are a number of things that we regularly observe are underthought about, underestimated in, as the user gets towards the process of buying something. So this is a big one here. As the user gets towards the process of emotionally wanting to buy something or to get in touch, they begin to become interested in life after the purchase. and they're interested in shipping, returns, stock. They're interested in what happens if I want a product in a certain size. I'm not sure exactly what the size is. So there are well-known buying factors later in conversion. Don't stay silent on those. Next, it's very possible to find out that there are small items of product specification that the user wants to know that will stop them buying if you don't tell them. In other words, regularly we find that there is important product specification information that if you stay silent on, you lose the sale. Net-a-Porter found this with their handbags about a decade ago. Handbag conversion was poor, and through some research they found out that there was a key piece of product information that they didn't include in the product display page. Net-a-Porter added in, as one of their specification items, the length of the strap. Now, I'm not a big handbag user or purchaser, so this was news on me, but it turns out that for those who do buy and use handbags, the length of the strap is a really important item that they need. So whether you're in B2B or whether you're in B2C, there will be product information that you need to be presenting to your customers, which are important in them considering your product, particularly as it gets to the later stages. Please don't stay silent on those items. Okay, let's try and pull some of this together. And I'm going to hand over to Andrew here, who's going to just talk us through what can happen or what should happen when we get our testing right and put this into practice. Andrew.
Thanks, Gareth. Yes, so yeah, testing, this is the final piece of the webinar before we get into talking about some questions you might have. So testing is, regularly important when it comes to optimizing your conversion. And we mean when we say testing, we mean testing as often as possible, just to kind of make sure that you're continually optimizing that conversion path for your customer. And when we say resurrect the qual, what we mean by that is we mean not only understand what is happening, but also why it's happening. So these case studies that follow, I hope they get to the bottom of not only what is happening, but why it's happening. So the first example to talk through is a client you may well know. They're called Slide Robes. They've been a client of ours since around 2016. And in the next few slides, I'm going to talk through what we've done for them specific to A/B testing. Okay, so just a bit of background. So Slide Robes not only provide slide robes, but they manufacture and fit them as well. And when they were involved in reproducing their website, one of the big things for them was to actually try and encourage people to go through the first step in the sales cycle, which for them was actually going to the point of downloading a brochure. And what that meant for Slide Robes was it was a data capture with intent. So Slide Robes were able to get customer information, and in return, the customer was able to get a brochure. And that was seen by Slide Robes as being the most fundamental thing to try and achieve in terms of conversion for their customers. So this was the control. So if anyone's done an A/B test before, you always need the control and then the variant. And another thing that's important with A/B testing is the variant needs to be one change. So you can't change multiple things. You need to change one thing in parallel to having your control. So this was the control with the clear call to action to download your free inspirational brochure, which is what Slide Robes want the users to do. And then in the second example, you can see here, there's this bar along the top, which was trying to be a reinforcement of credibility that the customers could look at in the viewport of the screen to hopefully reinforce the fact that they might go to the effort to actually download a brochure. So when they can compare and contrast those examples, the results were the fact that whenever the credibility was added, there was a 20% increase in those brochure requests. So their hypothesis was proven that adding some credibility actually made conversion for the brochure request rise, and it did significantly by 20%. So then they took this example a step further and thought, well, if this banner works, could we optimize the banner further? And at the time, Slide Robes had been on TV, and they'd also done a bit of advertising. So they thought, why don't we use this as the control, this option we're looking at here, and add another banner which might have other things on it to reinforce that TV presence. So that this is option 2, where they put some sort of credibility stuff around the showrooms that they had, but also they added here where they'd been on TV or where they'd advertised. And they thought that this would outperform the previous. And as we'll see what happened next, then actually the original version, or the first version of what they optimized, outperformed the second. So the hypothesis that they had was proven in the first control test, but disproven in the second. And that's the importance of testing and repetitive testing, to just always go with your hypothesis being right, continually optimizing something that worked first time, just continuing to tweak that and expecting it to still perform is the wrong way to approach it. So that A/B testing for slide ropes was hugely beneficial in this example. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll see that that was one of a series of changes that reflected overall in slide ropes, increasing the brochure request uptake by 18% overall. So you can see a number of initiatives and changes that happened on that page, from how it works to the customer stories. And each of those interactions and each of those elements, on the page, were A/B tested as well against other variations. And so the importance of A/B testing in the context of what slide ropes wanted to do, in that very singular kind of really reinforced prioritization of what the call to action needed to be, which was downloading brochures. It increased by 18% as a result of a number of those initiatives, all A/B tested. Okay, so the next example, this is an organization called The Week, and they are one of a number of organizations, magazines, who manage their subscription to their magazines through online. So many brands like The Week and other examples which I'll show in the case study, their physical magazines and their digital magazines, more than half of their subscriptions are managed online. And The Week are a publication who publish a range of content, and they also own the likes of Viz and Men's Health. And they wanted to really test the fact that they believed that if they can increase conversion rate on subscriptions, that could have a massive impact on their whole business from a revenue perspective. And we were part of an online team brought in to really try and optimize and make that as an efficient process as possible through the sales funnel for The Week. So they, as an organization, their current conversion rate before we started, one of the first things we done before we really engaged with The Week was do a bit of benchmarking and a bit of baselining. So their conversion rate was 3.68%. And at the time, we didn't really know whether that was competitive or not. Certainly in a lot of industries, that would be seen as not a bad conversion rate. But what we've seen when we looked at others, so when we looked at, say, for example, greatmagazines.co.uk, their main competitor in the UK, who would have magazines such as Empire and Grazia, they enjoyed conversion rates of more than double of The Week. And that made The Week realize, okay, well, what are we doing wrong that great magazines are doing right? And then if we looked even further afield and we seen what was happening in America, for example, Market and Sherpa, who are a research agency, looked across the spectrum of US magazine subscription companies and found that there was up to 22% conversion rate for some of those magazines. So if we actually think about the potential of that in terms of pounds and pence, we can see that if The Week had the conversion rate of great magazines, they could have risen from 54,832 to 162,113. And if they had the conversion rate of the maximum from the Sherpa marketing report, nearly £335,000 in revenue. And then if we actually take that further to look at The Week versus great magazines in terms of what revenue that could be lost, over the course of a month, that could equate to nearly 110,000 and nearly 1,300,000 per year if you do the maths on that conversion rate. And then a staggering example, if you compare it to the Sherpa marketing example with a 22.4% maximum, over the year, not shy of nearly £3.5 million of revenue lost based on if they had a conversion rate that would have equated to 22%. So, but taking that aside, it would be it was far too much for us to aim for the 22%. But we did think, well, what if we could get to 8%? You know, what would the maths look like there? As you can see there, perhaps close to £1.5 million per annum of value that could be driven, compared to £657,000 with the 3.9% conversion rate. So what we're going to do now is run through just a couple of very short snippets from the usability tests that we ran with this client, just to show and highlight the power of that qual that I mentioned, the power of understanding why things are happening, and what user feedback is showing was conversion inhibiting in their first iteration of the description flow that we were asked to analyze. So we'll look at this first one briefly.
I don't see any prices here.
So yeah,
so I guess what I'm thinking is I'm slightly frustrated that I don't see any prices on this page.
Yeah, so those two examples, sorry, show the fact that, you know, users, that was a couple of multiple users we tested with, wanted and expected that pricing information to be there up front. And you know, that was a key thing that we found when we compared it with others, that when people seen that, they felt it was a much more transparent and informed journey from that point forward. So on to the next clip.
Test, I'd be sort of slightly overwhelmed by this page. It just feels like it's too much information here. Also, I'm wondering in the back of my mind about this 6 free issues, then 31.25. On other sites, I've had to put credit card information in before getting the free issues, and that always worries me because I worry that I'll forget about my card and then I'll just be put on the paid plan. So
yeah, so in that clip there, we can see that the user felt a little bit overwhelmed with information that they didn't need, but then information that they did like to see, and to answer their key concern wasn't really in there. So for example, that you mentioned there about the credit card, in fact, he thought that was something he would forget about, so that inhibited his flow in that process. And then our final clip to show.
So subscribe to the online option. Is it? Okay, first of all, I found it's better in that now I can see here it's told me options and what the costs are immediately. So this is what.
So the delight in that guy's voice is because he sees the pricing this time, and in the previous example he hadn't seen the pricing, and he thought that then he was maybe going to be in for a shock when he got to the next stage. So the importance of testing, understand what is happening, and why importantly it's happening with usability tests in particular, gets you to that source of insight which can help you make better design decisions. And that's what we're going to get to just briefly here before we wrap up for questions and answers. Apologies, we've run a little bit over, but we will try and still get to as many questions as we can in 5 to 6 minutes. So this diagram here, this is our version of an always-on optimization model that Amazon published in the 90s. And what I want to focus on is not the whole diagram, I'm talking about it in depth, but where we see those feedback loops, so the 2 arrows of between validation to design and development and validation to hypothesis. What we want to kind of reinforce from this example today is that when you're testing and when you're optimizing, adding in points of that validation in terms of, you know, when you're testing, are you seeing qualitative data coming back? Are you seeing quantitative data coming back? If you're testing variations like A/B tests, sometimes that validation leads to insight, which you can say, well, version B worked better than version A, so let's instruct design and development to roll out version B. But what testing often brings is new insight and new forms of data that you hadn't maybe hadn't formed part of your data collection or research throughout the linear project lifecycle, and might not have been even what you were testing, but which makes its way back into hypothesis. So then you start to think then as a team, well, this continually come up in testing. We need to start to think about the reasons why it's happening, and start to actually prioritize those reasons, start to make that into prioritize the design decisions we're going to make, and then that goes through the cycle as well. So that knowledge leading to insight, which leading to better design decisions, both ones that are quick, based on testing that you can actually quantify, and it's an A/B test that you can actually make design decisions with quickly to roll out, or the hypotheses that come about as a result of new insight that you might have gained through your testing and validation as well. And then our final slide before we wrap is just a recap on everything we've talked about. And I'm not gonna spend any time on this really, but just to kind of make sure that when you're going through your conversion optimization thinking or process as an organization, that you really need to think about the sales cycle. Users are in control. The more you have them on the right hand side and you're in control, the more you're thinking about building awareness. Make sure that when you're working with agencies or you're in only internal teams, you're integrating all that activity. Really work on those flows. Really try and hit home on the things that are killing conversion. And importantly, test to make sure that you're continually learning and continually optimizing your experience for your customer. And that's us. We're into Q&A. So thanks everyone for your watching of the webinar today. So I'm just going to actually dip into Q&A and see if there are any questions that we can pick up on. So
I have one for you, Andrew, if it's helpful to get us kicked off.
Yes, that'd be great. Oh, sorry, I for some reason I can't see them there at the minute.
No problem. The question is, how do you decide what research you should use to do conversion optimization? One of those examples appeared to be driven by A/B tests, and the other example then seemed to be driven maybe more by usability testing. So how might we know which approach to take to find out what we need to find out?
Yeah, so I think it does depend on the information that you have at your disposal as to what you would test with. So, for example, if you have that hypothesis bit that we talked about in the Amazon example, so that hypothesis is key to what test decisions you may make off the back of that. So, if the hypothesis is that like the slide ropes, that they believe that adding credibility would reinforce the people signing up the brochure, then an A/B test might be better. But if you're lacking any sort of qualitative feedback from users on the website, or you're just not understanding why particular users are having a problem with a particular part of a journey, and there's a high drop-off rate or a high checkout abandonment rate, that's where if you can't hone in on the problem through data, usability testing would be a much more preferential way of going about finding that insight, because you really need to understand maybe a myriad of reasons why customers are having an issue with that page, and getting those real examples through usability testing and seeing that narration is often a good way to hit home on probably a few things that could be wrong with that part of the journey. So those are a couple of examples there to hopefully identify the right type of test or experiment to run.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andrew. I see another couple of questions come through, so I'll maybe answer one, and then I'll maybe bat one back in your direction, Andrew, if I may.
Yeah.
But there's a question in here. How easy was it to source the sales conversion data for competitor magazines? The industry that I work in proves quite difficult. Any tips? Tom, it's a great question, and the truth is we were very fortunate in that the Week project, because it just happens to be an industry that is very open about its conversion rates. And the reason that it's very open about its conversion rates is because most of them are published on their media packs. So it's an industry that relies on advertising, and one of the things that they have to do in order to let advertising know that they're good value is to share their conversion rates. So we were very fortunate in that instance. But we do work across a variety of sectors, and whilst it's not always just as easy, it can be reasonably straightforward. There's an excellent website called Grow Code that we often use. I'm just looking at some of its stats. It can give you average conversion by product type, for instance, across food and drink, health and beauty, toys and games, jewelry, home and garden, clothing, sports, electronics. So that's available. You can get it by industry, agricultural supplies, arts and crafts, baby and child, cars and motorcycling. You can get it by country, you can get it by traffic source. So it definitely is available to get it there. I think another thing which is worth mentioning is that sometimes we find that headline conversion number not particularly helpful. We often find that there's detail and nuance behind the headline, which is important. So for instance, it's not uncommon that an organization might have a poor conversion ratio, but they find actually the conversion ratio on some products or for some routes to market or for some sales channels are actually quite high. And for others, they're quite low. So the information is there if you go searching for it. It's a case of doing plenty of digging and find the right sources. Okay, and maybe one final thing for you, Andrew. I'm conscious of time. With a question there, my company wants to share wireframes and prototypes with other teams in the organization. How can I convince them that the other teams should not drive decisions on the product, as they are not the target audience? What types of ways can that conversation be facilitated to encourage people to realize that the designs are for someone else?
Yeah. So that's from Alessandro, we'll say. So
yes.
Yeah. So whenever organizations want to drive decisions that aren't necessarily theirs to own, it's more the team who are responsible for the UX. Very often, one of the best things to do is to try and bring that insight to the conversation. So what I'm picking up from that question is, how do you want to convince them that the decisions that need to be made off the back of the work that they still need to be kept with the team here? And I would maybe go back to something like the diagram that we showed at the end, that Amazon example that we've repurposed for our own use in Fathom, and that, you know, the team that with the insight, the team with the research, the data, and the team who's made the design decisions have gone on a journey already where it hasn't just been all influenced by them. It's been driven by user insight. It's been driven by testing. It's been driven by that performance design, under that performance design kind of ethos. So for that to then, you know, go to someone else and then be designed by someone else and lose that insight and lose that connection with what's been done, I would maybe try and create a conversation around the fact that, you know, we're the ones who've been learning and designing and optimizing over time. So let us see this through. Let us continue to work on this, because that kind of continued learning, continued knowledge, and continuing to refine the process should probably still lie with the core team involved in the process to date.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much for that. And thank you to everyone for your questions. We didn't get to all the questions. However, we always do answer all of our questions, and we respond to them and write them up on our blog. So just on that, folks, I want to kind of just let you know what we always do at the end of our webinar. Firstly, thank you for sticking with us so far. There's a number of ways that you can stay in touch and get the webinar follow-up. After each webinar, we always share the video of the webinar, and we always answer the questions which come from it. So the video Q&A will all be on our website next Monday or Tuesday. We will update our Twitter feed when that is ready. So please do follow us on Twitter, and we'll let you know. Outside of that, please do stay in touch with us. As we always say, we are a friendly bunch, and there's lots of ways you can stay in touch. You can subscribe to our email newsletter, Immersion, on our website. You can follow us on Twitter, or you can also connect with myself and Andrew on Twitter. You're very welcome to do that. We publish our blog content on LinkedIn, and we always send out a survey after our webinars asking people how they found it. So it's always great to know what we've done well, always good to know what we could do better, and in particular, it's always good to know what topics, what future ideas you might have for webinars that we might be able to do in the future. So for now, thank you so much for your time and attention over lunch. And we'll see you for the next one. Thank you so much.